The committee will come to order. We do have a quorum and we are ready for business. A couple of little housekeeping things before we get started. Was asked yesterday this, probably should have made mention of this, but it may look a little bit strange to the public that we're seated on the back row up here. It was never our intention that we'd insulate ourselves from the public. There's a couple of practical reasons for that. The first one is that this is a large committee and we fit on the back row. We don't fit on the front row, and so that makes it very difficult for the chairman, at least, to be able to recognize those who want to ask questions. And also, for a chairman, it's very difficult to just operate physically. The other is that when this place was, I'll be kind in my comments here. When this place was designed, it was designed for joint hearings of the House and the Senate. And there are, of course, fewer numbers on the Senate committees than there are on the House committees. And so the Senate committees can fit easily on the front row, and we just don't fit, and so it's just easier. I for one, don't like people talking from behind me. Not that I can't hear them, it's just that it's very difficult. So those are the practical reasons why we're sitting on the back row. Has nothing to do with our being terrified of anybody or anything. So we do want you to understand that that's the reason for that. Also, as we indicated yesterday, no outbursts will be tolerated. We've got a lot of ground to cover. We've plowed a lot of ground already. Those of you who wish to testify today, please keep that in mind and keep your testimony as brief as possible. We've heard an awful lot of information. If you have something new that you would like to contribute, of course, we're more than willing to hear this out. So, although there have been no time limits until now, we want to continue that practice so that everyone gets a full opportunity to testify. Just keep in mind that we've got an awful lot of people here, and that it's really courteous to make sure that they get an opportunity to testify by respecting that they would like to do so. With that, we'll begin immediately with a continuing testimony, and we're looking at the sign-up sheets that were put in yesterday as well. There were a couple from yesterday that indicated they might be here this morning. Daryl Ford. He's there. Would you come forward? And we've got some seats up here in the front. Come up and sit up there until you're called. I'll call your names in advance, and then you come up and take those seats. That way, it won't take time to get everybody up here. Jeff Estes. Lori Birchfield, Daryl Birchfield. If you are present in the room, just indicate that you are. Julie Lindy. Janet Bryant. Ned Bryant. Okay. Then we will proceed to that point. Daryl Ford.
Good morning, Chairman and committee. I'm honored to be able to speak to you today on HB 2. I am the son. My father was a Tuskegee Airman in World War II, and he's seen discrimination. I am a retired quality assurance specialist, and I've had a very good career and a good life. And I don't believe I can ever remember being a victim of discrimination. My favorite Republican was the Reverend Martin Luther King. And my most favorite Republican was his son, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who said that in the future our children will be judged by the content of their character. And I wonder about the character of those that seem to say things that they can't prove, they can't back up. And I wonder with this bill, HB2, what will the enforcement of this bill be? Will it require pastors to turn in their sermons and their speeches like they did in Houston, Texas? To tyrannize your fellow citizens is beyond belief that something like that could happen. I know when I've been discriminated against, I just change color. And then I'm not discriminated against anymore. I can get by it just by changing color. So I don't know what other people can do about that, but making a bad law isn't going to help that much. And that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Are there questions? Thank you, sir, for being here. Jeff Estes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Jeff Estes, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. And I appreciate the opportunity to hear, really hate to call it both sides because I know they're both sides of the issue, but really it is a discussion that we all need to be having and how we're having discourse with one another, how we're sorting out some issues. So I obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, I'm a pastor and I'm concerned about the ramifications House Bill 2 would have upon my church and perhaps the way our people would live their faith and what ramifications would come down upon them for living out their beliefs. I understand that the LGBT community has said that they only want to be recognized. And while I can understand their desire to be recognized, and I think a lot of words like dignity and respect have been put out there, and there obviously needs to be a discourse in our conversation with each other where we have dignity and respect for one another. However, recent history has been showing that it's not just about discourse and not just about being recognized, it's about lawsuits, and it's about threats, and where will it end or how far will it go? And I have people in my church that wonder, will there be that point where our church is sought after to be attacked or closed down for our views and our beliefs over how we see and interpret Scripture? And so I think those fears are realized are becoming more and more vocalized because we have an atmosphere of lawsuits in our communities. And I think House Bill 2 is facilitating that. Section 2, 675901, paragraph 2 of this bill states that as a purpose is to secure the state against domestic strife and unrest. Now I would submit to you that the bill is going to do exactly the opposite of that. It is going to create that atmosphere where people are fearful of lawsuits and angered by lawsuits and in a spirit of antagonism one against the other because one person's going to sue, and there's going to be a countersuit and countersuit and countersuit, and it is no longer a community of trying to work together, but a community of who can sue the other one to oblivion. So I think that's very concerning. This bill would specifically violate a person's freedom of association and partnerships. Both sides of this issue should greatly consider the mutual ramifications. I'm just going to illustrate if I could. What if I, as a pastor who believes an interpretation of the Bible that I've come to, where I would take probably the quintessential passage that is often debated on this, Romans 1, and I was to go to a t-shirt shop that was known to be owned by a lesbian couple, and I was to ask them to print up a t-shirt that says, add the words equals silence my faith. So if I was to ask them to print up that t-shirt would it be fair for me to demand of them that they produce material that goes contrary to their convictions and their core values? I submit to you from my perspective, I don't think that would be fair on my part to try to impose someone to do what were my values against their own. And this illustration is not merely held by someone who has religious beliefs like myself. It was mentioned yesterday by one of the speakers or one of the people that gave testimony this opinion, but there's a very specific case where there are two lesbian ladies, Kathy Trotvetter and Diane DeGalarmo of BMP T-shirts, who were recently interviewed over this issue. And Diane stated, "We feel this isn't a gay or straight issue. No one should be forced to do something against what they believe in. It's as simple as that. And we feel likewise. If we were approached by an organization such as Westboro Church, I highly doubt we would do business with them." And my question upon that quote from these two lesbian ladies is, did they just open themselves up for a lawsuit? I don't think they should be fearful of a lawsuit because they're acting in consistency with their core values and beliefs. It was mentioned a lot yesterday about bullying and discrimination. And I don't want to take a lot of time here because I know there's been a lot of comment given already, but I would simply say everyone is responsible to have a demeanor that reflects, again, dignity and respect one towards another. Where bullying exists, it really should stop. Where threats exist, it really should stop. But I would submit to you that I in part, run a media page that discusses values of faith on this issue. And I can testify to bullying and threats from the other side of this issue where there are, when I say threats, I'm not just saying, I really don't like your opinion. I'm saying, I really wish you were dead. I wish you would blank, 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 and all kinds of vitriol coming from people who believe differently. So I think bullying happens from both sides, and it's never right. And so I think anybody who has a position here to say that someone who believes differently from someone else has the right to then bully them or is somehow condoned in their bullying is a view that I don't think really any of us want to hold. I want to close by saying a question came up yesterday a few times that stated something along these lines: is your faith more important than mine? I believe that question comes from a misunderstanding of the faith-based argument. The faith-based argument isn't me saying that my beliefs and my values are more important than yours. It isn't even saying that my interpretation of Scripture is more valuable than yours. Matter of fact, my argument against House Bill 2 is that instead of having cut out slices of people that are protected in their rights, we all should have a foundational right of freedom. And that freedom would be to live out your beliefs and values without fear of threat of lawsuit or further punishment. I want to stand up for your rights to believe as you believe, and I would like for you to stand up for me to believe as I believe without the threat of lawsuit. There's a little phrase that I like to say that someone gave to me one day, and that is, those convinced against their will are of the same opinion still. So I wouldn't want to come to you and twist your arm behind your back and make you believe like I believe. But I would also like the mutual respect to not ask me to do the same, to sacrifice my beliefs and my convictions to accommodate someone else's view. I think we should all operate off of a platform of freedom. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and fellow committee members.
Are there questions? Representative McCrosty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pastor Estes, a lot has been brought up over the last couple of days with regard to sermons being subpoenaed in Houston. Can you share any more information for the rest of this body regarding that?
Mr. Chairman and Representative McCrosty, I frankly think that there is a lot of education that needs to happen. Right now, what's happening is you're getting some people coming behind the microphone and saying there's the threat of lawsuit and the threat of perhaps even prison. And then there are others on the other side saying that's purely fabricated, that's not the case, and that won't happen. To answer that question, I don't think it's isolated to this room or isolated to this community. I think there is a substantial record that says there are areas in Idaho that have sought criminal penalty against going or for going against the adding of these words. So while we can, I'm not an expert on that issue. I read the papers like other people do, and I follow these issues like other people do because it has ramifications on my church. But do I think that it could go there? Absolutely, and I think we avoid going there if we operate from a platform of freedom. I respect your rights and and believe that God has given you the freedom to choose, and I simply ask for the same for people of faith like myself. And as you said yesterday, you have faith as well, and you're following faith as you understand it. And I would think that we both should have the freedom to pursue the knowledge of God without the threat of lawsuit or imprisonment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative McCrosty.
Follow up?
Representative McCrosty?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, Pastor Estes, I guess what I would like to perhaps introduce into the record is there seems to be a fear of lawsuits, and I don't think that anybody wants to have, we certainly don't want this legislation to be something that produces lawsuits. So could you describe the lawsuit that took place in Houston regarding pastor sermons being subpoenaed?
Well, Mr. Chairman and Representative McCrosty, again, I'm not a legal expert, nor do I think it's my role to educate everyone over what happened in Texas. I think it's all of our responsibility to ask this question: are people of faith being sued for their beliefs? And the answer to that question is yes. And is it over this issue of freedom to force someone to go against their core values? And the answer to that is yes. So while the details of Texas are clearly attainable to all who want to do the research, the more verifiable fact for your question is that threat real? It's not only real, but it's being realized in modern society as we see it. Those cases have been given over and over and over again as examples to where we're repeating ourselves. So that reality exists.
Representative McCrosty, I believe there is a document that you received yesterday that describes what happened in Houston in detail. Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good morning, Mr. Estes.
I just can barely see your name, so. Thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you.
All right. So I first want to make it clear that legislators just expand the law and judges interpret the law. Now, to my understanding from hearing your testimony, you believe that you just want to pursue your own course of life. And my question to you is, how do you feel that this bill will impact you or stop you from pursuing the essence that you desire in your life?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Jordan, thank you for your question. And frankly, what I think House Bill 2 is doing is opening the door for lawsuits for people of faith that hold different views than other people regarding this issue of sexuality and whether we have the right to coerce someone to do something contrary to their beliefs. I believe House Bill 2 opens that door. And again, that's a matter of study from other districts or other areas that have passed such legislation, and what's happening in those communities is that people are being sued and people are being threatened, and even here in our own state, which has again been brought to bear, there's been a drawing back from those threats of the people in Coeur d'Alene. But I think that this legislation has proved out in other areas that that's exactly what happens. It becomes a society that is willing to coerce others by lawsuit. So I don't know that that's simply my opinion. I think that's verifiable by what we're seeing in society.
A follow-up question, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Jordan.
Mr. Estes, what part of this bill makes you, or any part of this bill, makes it feel like it would supersede the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Jordan, while I'm not a constitutional law expert or a lawyer, I'm going to speak as what I would call your average layman and a pastor of people. What I'm doing is I'm observing what happens as a result of such legislation. So it's one thing to be hypothetical, or another thing to say, well, I think this exact wording is going to do that. What I'm seeing is that legislation like this, with this wording, making a protected class of people based on this issue, is being therefore, or being subsequently applied to people of faith under the banner of lawsuit. And again, we don't have to go any further than Coeur d'Alene to see how that began to play out. And again, there's been a drawing back from that, but that's not a made-up scenario. That was the actual circumstance that this issue deals with. So I'm probably not being very clear, but
Follow-up question, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Jordan.
Mr. Estes, now you explained that you're a pastor.
yes.
Thank you. Are you aware that there is no law in this country that can overturn a church's constitutional right?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Jordan, while there may be no law that can overturn a person's individual rights, that does not, what you just said, does not answer what's happening in society. It doesn't answer what's happening with these places being sued for holding a position of not wanting to go against their conscience. So laws are only as good as people are willing to abide by them and to carry them out. And frankly, that becomes a whole nother discussion about law and what we're doing in society. So again, that, while I can appreciate your question, it seems to ignore what's happening in reality, is that people are being sued and their businesses are being targeted. And I think that's a very specific point, is those businesses are being targeted because, or by the LGBT group, because there's a point that wants to be made, that they disagree with those views held by those business owners. And I think those ramifications aren't isolated to the business owner. I think that when we go down this path, it certainly will, or certainly can, open the door to let that happen to the church. And by the way, my belief is the church is not the building or even necessarily the organization. The church is comprised of believers throughout the world, otherwise known as the body of Christ. So I don't think it stops, or it only matters if it comes to the church. I think it matters if it happens to individuals. It matters if it's happening to the individual business owner or person that they are being coerced to go against their beliefs.
Mr. Chairman, one last question.
Representative Jordan.
Well, actually, I'm going to close with that because my job is really to interpret the law to the best of my ability, like you. But I do want to thank you for your testimony, and I do hope that you will, again, look at the constitutional rights that you have and that we all have and apply that to your based opinion. Thank you, sir.
Are there further questions? Representative Crane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Representative Jordan and Representative Crosty have raised some valid concerns and actually valid questions. Begging your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call the attorney from Alliance Defending Freedom to come up and answer some of these questions, because ADF has been at the forefront of some of these lawsuits and can speak first person about some of these issues and answer the questions for Representative Jordan and Representative Crosty and for other members here of the committee like myself. So if Ken would be, if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have Ken from ADF come forward.
Is he here?
Yes.
Would you come forward, please?
Mr. Chairman, should I step down?
That would be fine. I think that your ordeal is over.
May I, Mr. Chairman, may I make a closing statement?
Please do.
Mr. Chairman and fellow committee members, I again thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. And while I can appreciate the questions, I'm very glad to have someone who's a lot more of a legal expert than myself to answer some of these questions. And I can appreciate the idea of being studied on what the law means. I think there's also a responsibility of our legislators to see how laws are being applied to society, not just what the law says, but how it's being applied to society. So while knowing the law is important, there needs to be certainly a reality of the connect to what that means and how it's being interpreted in society. And so that's the basis of my argument, is that we should all be free to follow our consciences and be accountable for our choices without the threat of litigation and lawsuit. And I would just like to see us all operate on a platform of freedom. So thank you, Mr. Chairman and fellow committee members.
Thank you.